Picture this. You are standing in like the pitch black of a subterranean cavern. Ice cold water is rushing past your knees because someone just triggered a massive flood trap.
Oh, it is a total nightmare scenario.
Right. And to your left, you've got this half-orc barbarian screaming in absolute blind rage. He is desperately trying and failing to claw his way up a slick rock wall.
Completely ignoring the actual geometry of the room.
Exactly. And somewhere in the darkness, a starving rock gnome wizard has just been flushed out of a crevice by the floodwaters. He's clinging to a tree branch right before he passes out from sheer exhaustion and plummets to the ground.
It's the absolute definition of chaos.
Yeah.
Just a complete, unadulterated tactical breakdown.
It really is. And we've got our hands on the DM to Brus campaign logs today, specifically the Phandelver and Beyond log, sessions 3 and 4.
The Cragmaw Cave encounter.
Yes, exactly. But our mission for this deep dive isn't just to recount some fantasy skirmish, you know?
No.
We are looking at this log as a masterclass in high-stakes crisis management.
Because it really highlights how personal backstories actively collide with survival.
Yes. We're going to extract the tactical lessons hidden inside all this chaos. Specifically, how a character's psychological baggage dictates their split-second decisions.
Which is honestly why this source material is so compelling. I mean, in a pristine tactical environment, everyone knows their role, right?
Yeah.
The geometry is mapped. Execution is paramount.
But here, everything goes wrong.
Right. In this scenario, every single character's history is aggressively interfering with their immediate survival.
So let's look at the immediate aftermath of that cavern flood to see how those instincts take over. We've got Merwin Farfinder, the rock gnome wizard, and his tactical reality is grim.
Yeah, he was captured a week ago, hasn't eaten in over a day.
Right, he escapes his bonds, hides in a crevice, and then is immediately flushed out by the flood. So the team's dwarf fighter, Dane, and the halfling cleric, Timekeeper, they rush over to stabilize and feed him.
They prioritize the asset, which makes sense.
But then we look at the barbarian, Threshtog, and his response is entirely dictated by his past.
Threshtog is a fascinating study in conflicting priorities here.
Yeah.
You see, he has a history in this region. He actually used to live in Phandelver.
Oh, right, and he fought off goblin raids there.
Exactly. He fought alongside the very dwarf the party is currently trying to rescue, Gundren. So when the ambush occurs, his instinct isn't, tactical assessment. It's pure, unadulterated aggression.
He just enters a state of rage.
Yeah, he completely ignores the geographical reality that the goblins are currently out of reach. He tries to blindly rush across a rushing creek to scale a steep passage entirely alone.
Okay, but I have to challenge the idea that his rage is a liability here. I mean, in a combat scenario, aggression scales your damage output, right?
Generally, yeah.
You want your frontline fighter hitting as hard as possible. So why is his aggression being framed as a tactical failure in the logs?
Well, because aggression without geometry is just a really quick way to get yourself killed. Rage provides a massive physical advantage, certainly, but it also creates a deadly tunnel vision.
Ah, I see.
By separating from the group and fighting the slick terrain instead of the actual enemy, Threshtog nearly took himself out of the fight before it even started.
Because if he had continued that solitary pursuit up the wall,
The goblins at the top would have easily picked him off.
he would have literally handed them the high ground and isolated himself from his healers.
Exactly. But this is where we see his crucial character development. As the immediate adrenaline spike of the rage begins to plateau, his tactical clarity actually returns.
He realizes the wall isn't working.
Right. He looks over and sees Dane leading the cleric and the wizard up a much safer alternate tunnel route. And Threshtog makes a conscious pivot.
He recognizes the mathematical advantage of force concentration.
Yes. He calms his base instincts and falls in line behind Dane.
It's a literal shift from purely instinctual reaction to calculated cooperation. And it pays off immediately because the second they crest that upper tunnel, they walk straight into another ambush.
The upper chamber fight.
Right. Threshtog manages to kill a goblin, but then a wolf leaps from behind a corner, lunges at him, and lands a critical hit. By all traditional metrics, he should have been brought down right there.
Oh, absolutely. But he survives solely due to his physiological heritage. As a half-orc, he possesses this biological failsafe known as relentless endurance.
Which is just wild to think about. It's not just a matter of being tough, is it?
No, it is a profound adrenaline override. When they take a blow that would normally sever consciousness, their biology essentially rejects the trauma temporarily.
Wow.
Yeah, they remain standing on sheer, stubborn willpower, forcing their body to operate through catastrophic damage.
So he essentially forces his nervous system to delay the knockout, and that buys just enough time for Nijovic, the Aasimar cleric, to rush in and pour a healing potion down his throat.
Right, which lets Threshtog finish the wolf. And that near-death experience fundamentally alters how Threshtog approaches the next room.
Which brings us to the boss fight. We just looked at how managing internal impulses keeps you alive against the environment. But how do you handle a tactical scenario when the threat is actively trying to dominate you psychologically?
The Clarg encounter.
Exactly. Having survived the initial ambush, the team now stares down the boss of this cavern, Clarg the Bugbear.
And this transition requires a complete shift in methodology. They have to move from a test of physical endurance into psychological warfare.
Because Clarg isn't just swinging a weapon.
Right. Clarg doesn't just attack the party. He stress out, names himself, derides them, and issues a challenge from the top of the stairs. He is establishing dominance and forcing the party to react to his tempo.
And Threshtog's response here is brilliant. I mean, this is the same half-orc who, 10 minutes ago, was blindly throwing himself up a rock wall in a roaring rage.
The contrast is amazing.
Facing Clarg, he doesn't attack. He drops to one knee and starts aggressively flattering the bugbear. He's like, Clarg the powerful, Clarg the mighty, Clarg the ruler of goblins.
But if we examine Threshtog's military background, we realize this isn't improvisation. He served for years with the Duke's Guard. He understands unit tactics.
He bends the knee to stroke Clarg's ego, but he explicitly does not go prone. Let's analyze the geometry of that stance because it is highly technical.
It really is.
Going prone in a melee fight is a death sentence. The kinetic energy required to stand back up leaves you completely vulnerable. Instead, Threshtog sets his feet like a track and field runner in starting blocks.
The logs actually note this is a stance taught by the Flaming Fist Mercenary Company.
Right. He achieves maximum forward thrust while visually appearing completely submissive. He even sets his great axe down horizontally on his knee, disarming the visual threat, but keeps both hands wrapped around the haft.
He is hacking Clarg's ego to manipulate the clock.
Yeah.
By keeping his eyes locked on the bugbear and his head bowed, the moment he decides to launch, 100% of his kinetic energy translates directly into forward momentum.
He's basically creating a buffer zone so the rest of his team can establish flanking positions.
Exactly.
But, if you manage a team, you've probably worked with a Dane. Someone who is so obsessed with their own personal brand or metrics for success that they actively sabotage a delicate team strategy.
Right. The glory seekers.
Yes, because right when Threshtog establishes this perfect tactical deception, Dane ruins it. Dane ignores the stall tactic, runs straight up the stairs, and attacks Clarg, instantly escalating the room into a full-blown crisis.
Which throws the whole plan out the window.
Why throw away the advantage like that?
Well, it comes down to his sociological conditioning. Dane is a mountain dwarf of the Iron Song clan from High Forge, and the Iron Song identity is entirely built around ancestral glory.
Wait, isn't there a story about his grandfather?
Yeah, the clan name originates from his grandfather playing a violin to inspire troops during a grand battle. So every member of that clan learns an instrument to carry into war.
That's intense.
It is. And Dane was trained as light mountain infantry, which is a doctrine that favors decisive, aggressive shock tactics.
So the concept of sneaking around and flattering a goblinoid goes against, centuries of his clan's doctrine.
Precisely. To an Iron Song dwarf whose core motivation is reclaiming lost strongholds and glory, bowing to a bugbear is a profound insult to his heritage.
His backstory just completely overrides the modern tactical necessity.
He sees an enemy, and his conditioning dictates that he charges. But by doing so, he forces his entire team to abandon their positioning and react to his escalation.
I have to push back on your praise for Threshtog here, though.
Oh, how so?
You are calling Threshtog a tactical genius for this flaming fist stall tactic. But literally a minute after Dane charges, the room descends into chaos. A goblin takes the unconscious rogue Chiron hostage, and Threshtog ultimately gets killed by Clarg. Doesn't the fact that he died prove his stalling tactic was actually a failure?
I wouldn't call it a failure of the tactic, actually. It was a sacrifice of positioning to save an asset.
How do you mean?
When the goblin held a scimitar to Chiron's throat, Threshtog had to adapt instantly. He yelled out a secondary deception. He shouts, "We have no chance of defeating Clarg," which successfully drew the room's aggro.
Okay, so he pulls their attention.
Yes, he used that split-second distraction to physically flank the goblin and neutralize the hostage threat. He absorbed the structural collapse Dane caused.
He saved the hostage, but the resulting geometry left his back exposed to Clark.
Exactly, and Clark brought him down.
So he went down for the second time in a single continuous engagement. Dane has to rush over with the healing potion to revive him yet again. It turns into a grueling battle of attrition that they only win by collapsing on Clark through sheer numbers.
Which really brings us to the next critical phase. We see how one team member's rigid adherence to their own brand forces everyone else to scramble. But what happens when a team refuses to learn that lesson?
Oh man, the consequences bleed directly into the primary objective, the rescue of Sildar.
A VIP.
Right, the VIP they were hired to find. The party enters the final chamber and finds one last goblin standing over the unconscious, battered body of Sildar.
Now, in a hostage situation where you hold numerical superiority, the optimal doctrine is to provide the cornered enemy with a golden bridge. You give them a safe avenue of retreat.
Most of the party recognizes this geometry. They initiate negotiations, offering the goblins safe passage out of the cave complex in exchange for Sildar's life.
But Dane, still operating on the adrenaline of the Clark fight and still rigidly bound to his light mountain infantry mindset, decides negotiation is a waste of time.
He just draws his bow and fires an arrow at the goblin.
It is a devastating miscalculation. By firing the arrow, Dane immediately communicates to the goblin that the golden bridge is an illusion.
Yeah, that escape isn't actually an option.
Right. Realizing it cannot escape, the goblin executes the only tactical maneuver it has left to inflict damage on the superior force. It slits Sildar's throat before the party can cut it down.
It is the ultimate example of how rigid adherence to a personal brand destroys team utility. Dane's need for decisive action nearly fails the entire mission.
He almost got the primary asset killed.
Sildar is literally bleeding out on the floor with a severed artery. And I want to look closely at the mechanics of how they save him, because it's not just magic.
Oh, the triage here is fascinating.
Jovic, the cleric, rushes in, but he doesn't just pour a potion down Sildar's throat.
Well, if you simply pour a magical healing fluid into a severed carotid artery, the fluid lacks the physical containment necessary to bind the tissue. It just bleeds out alongside the natural blood flow.
Right. So Jovic utilizes a physical healer's kit first. He uses mundane bandages and pressure to act as a tourniquet, creating a closed biological system.
That's the crucial step.
Once the wound is physically stabilized, then they administer the healing potion they found in the goblin's stash. The magic then has the closed environment it needs to specifically knit his severed vocal cords back together so Sildar can actually speak.
And Sildar surviving isn't just a win for the team's conscience. It's the only reason we obtain the critical intelligence that changes the entire scope of this deep dive.
Because without his vocal cords, the party is blind to the larger strategic reality.
They're completely blind.
Once Sildar can speak, he completely reframes the dungeon. He reveals that this wasn't just some random ambush by disorganized highwaymen, it was a targeted extraction.
A coordinated hit.
Yeah. A shadowy figure known only as the Spider explicitly ordered Clark to capture Gundren and his map to Wave Echo Cave. And the directive was highly specific. Gundren is not be harmed, but Sildar was considered entirely extendable.
It upgrades the threat level from localized bandits to a regional intelligence network. The Cragmaw clan are merely pawns here.
The Spider is the real player.
Exactly. The Spider understands the economic and strategic value of Wave Echo Cave, and they possess the logistical reach to hire proxy forces to secure it.
But Sildar shares another piece of intelligence that immediately raises red flags. He claims that while he was being tortured, he witnessed the goblins dragging Gundren away.
And he noticed something strange about the group.
Yes. He insists that one of the creatures in that group was a misshapen goblin with twisted features and glowing green eyes that radiated pure evil. He even noted that the other goblins seemed terrified of it.
Which is a profound discrepancy because we have conflicting surveillance data.
We really do. Merwin, the rock gnome wizard, had been hiding in that exact cave system for days prior to the flood. He was conducting active reconnaissance on the goblin movements.
Right, he was watching them constantly.
And when the party cross-references Sildar's account later, Merwin is adamant he never saw a green-eyed goblin. Not once.
That's a huge red flag.
Now, from a psychological standpoint, the explanation seems obvious. Sildar was enduring horrific physical torture. In a high-stress, high-pain environment, the human brain struggles to parse reality.
It maps internal terror onto external stimuli.
Exactly. So isn't it highly probable that this green-eyed goblin was simply a stress-induced hallucination, and his brain painted a regular goblin with the face of his worst fears?
Your skepticism is perfectly aligned with grounded psychological profiling. I mean, in any mundane scenario, we would absolutely categorize that as a trauma-induced hallucination.
Right.
But the campaign logs reveal a much more complex cosmological mechanic at play here. It was a hallucination, but it was not generated by Sildar's own trauma. It was a deliberately implanted vision by a deity.
A divine broadcast overriding his visual cortex. That's insane.
Precisely. The deity in question is Coronis, the greater immortal of time, who happens to be the patron of the party's halfling cleric, Timekeeper.
Okay, so there's a direct connection there.
Yes. In the lore governing this universe, greater immortals operate under strict planar limitations. They cannot simply physically manifest on the prime material plane to hand out intelligence briefings. It violates the cosmological laws of their existence.
So they have to find workarounds. That's actually a brilliant move by the DM. Using biological trauma as an antenna for a divine broadcast solves the problem of how a god intervenes without breaking the game's planar rules.
Exactly. Coronis foresaw that Sildar would eventually play a vital role in leading the fledgling Grand Duchy through an upcoming geopolitical crisis.
So Sildar is a key piece on the board.
Yes. So the deity exploited a loophole. Coronis utilized Sildar's altered, highly vulnerable mental state during the torture session as a conduit. He overlaid a vision of a future terrible danger, symbolized by the glowing green eyes, onto the physical form of one of the mundane goblins in the room.
Wow, so Sildar's eyes were processing a standard goblin, but his brain was receiving a divine warning about a future threat, visually mapped onto the physical space.
The trauma was real, the torture was real, but the specific imagery was an encrypted broadcast.
It is a masterclass in blending gritty, grounded survival mechanics with high-concept divine lore. The immortals are constrained, so they literally use the localized trauma states of mortals as radio receivers.
It's beautifully executed.
It really is. So you have encrypted divine broadcasts, severed arteries, and a chaotic boss fight driven by ancestral baggage. Sildar finally asks them to escort him to Phandelver and offers a 50 gold contract.
The mission is finally secured.
Right. The adrenaline finally begins to burn off, the divine visions fade, the team is left standing in the quiet of this cavern, surrounded by the wreckage of their own tactical mistakes. How does a team actually process that level of near failure?
They process it by grounding themselves in their original motivations. Once the immediate threat is neutralized, Chiron, the tiefling rogue, begins sweeping the cave for assets.
Looking for loot.
Well, yes, but he discovers several crates of stolen merchandise stamped with the Lion Shield Coster insignia.
Which is the exact shipment he was originally contracted to track down, right?
Yes. For Chiron, discovering those supplies isn't just about liquidating loot. His broader character motivation is seeking financial stability to fund a long-term investigation into his father's murderer.
That's some heavy backstory.
Securing those crates validates his worth to his employers. It is a tangible step toward his ultimate objective, and it provides a stabilizing psychological anchor after the sheer chaos of the ambush.
And that stabilization sets the stage for a really profound team dynamic. Instead of immediately marching back out into the wilderness, the party decides to take a long rest right there in the boss chamber.
They actually stop and breathe.
Yeah, they set a watch schedule, they sit by the fire, and they actually talk. And the logs explicitly detail that by reflecting on their adventure, their specific successes, and their glaring failures, they advance to level 2.
The underlying mechanics of leveling up in this context are vital to understand. It is not framed as a simple mathematical progression where accumulating enough kills arbitrarily makes your muscles denser.
Right, it's not just XP goes up, you get stronger.
No. The acquisition of new skills is framed entirely as the result of deep, critical reflection.
It is the fantasy equivalent of an after-action review in the military or the corporate world. You don't actually gain new capabilities merely by surviving the goblin ambush.
Because survival is just the collection of raw data.
Exactly. The actual skill acquisition happens when you sit by the fire afterward and synthesize that data. It happens when you look at Dane and say, hey, your rigid adherence to your clan's glory almost got the hostage executed.
Or when you look at Thrishtog and acknowledge your blind rage almost left you broken at the bottom of a cliff before the fight even started.
Without that synthesis, the data is useless.
Knowledge and experience only yield growth when they are understood and actively applied to future behavior. If they had simply grabbed the lion shield crates and walked out of the cave without processing how close they came to a total party wipe due to their own character flaws, they would not have leveled up.
The rest period is the crucible where the growth actually occurs.
Precisely.
So, when we synthesize all of this, what are we left with? The Cragmaw Cave encounter was not a victory of flawless strategy. It was a victory of highly localized adaptation.
A lot of adapting on the fly.
Yes. It was won through Threshtog, recognizing his rage was failing and switching to the calculated deception of the Flaming Fist stance. It was won by the Clerics, Nunavik, and Timekeeper, utilizing both mundane physical tourniquets and magical triage to keep their assets breathing.
And ultimately, it was won by the team's ability to survive each other's psychological baggage just long enough to secure the objective.
It reinforces the reality that in any high-stakes environment, people are never just their skill sets. They're walking compilations of their backstories.
When a crisis hits, team members don't react to the objective facts of the room. They react to their own history.
Whether that means charging in recklessly to satisfy an ancestral demand for glory, or intuitively setting up a defensive posture based on old mercenary drills.
If you want to manage the chaos, you really have to understand the history driving the personnel.
And that brings me to a final thought for you to mull over. We analyzed how this party leveled up not in the middle of a frantic X-swing, but during the quiet, critical reflection afterward. Think about your own life.
Oh, this is a great point.
When you survive a chaotic, stressful week, when a project goes completely off the rails, or a sudden crisis floods your schedule and leaves you scrambling, do you actually take the time to sit by the fire and conduct an honest after-action review?
Or do you just keep pushing?
Right. Do you just grab your paycheck, the loot, and immediately march off to the next dungeon? Because if we learn anything from the absolute chaos of Cragmaw Caves, it's that just surviving the flood isn't enough. Real growth requires you to finally stop, sit down, and take the rest.